John 8:28. Dixit ergo eis Iesus, cum exaltaveritis filium hominis, tunc cognoscetis, quia ego sum, et a me ipso facio nihil, sed sicut docuit me pater, haec loquor. Therefore Jesus said to them, when you will lift up the Son of Man, then you will recognize that I am He, or I am, and that I do nothing from myself, but I speak these things just as the Father has taught me. This is a long verse, longish by the standards of this gospel, but it's not particularly complicated if we break it down into sections. And as we've seen before, one of the helpful things we can do is mark out where we would put quotation marks and other punctuation in a modern edition. So we might put a comma here, we might put a comma here, and we'd put a closing quotation mark here, maybe another comma here as well, depending on our preference. So that will help us just mentally to kind of break things up. And this runs against the purists' advice for thinking about Latin word order. So the purist in me, when I'm teaching my students, I tell them, take the word order as it comes to you in Latin, so that you can get in the habit of thinking Latinly, that is according to the way that people express themselves naturally in this language. But when we're reading the Vulgate, very often the means of expression and the word order itself is not actually particularly natural to Latin in general, because, as we've said so often, it hews so closely to the Greek word order that I think it's not too much to say that a little bit of dislocation from the order in which things are given to us in a particular passage in the Vulgate is not necessarily a big deal as we're trying to make sense of it. And that's simply because I think it struck a lot of native Latin speakers, in fact, we know for certain that this is the case, as sort of awkward and odd and stilted in certain places. So there's less pressure on us, I think, to take things in the order in which they're given to us, as a way of training ourselves to get accustomed to natural Latin word order, because, again, the word order in the Vulgate is often pretty unnatural, even by Latin standards. So I hope that's an encouragement to you. Okay, now to the words themselves. Therefore, Jesus said to them, nothing difficult there, when, at the specific time when, you will exalt or lift up the Son of Man. And I'm translating with a simple future tense here, but as you'll see from the ending, this is actually a future perfect. Future perfect, as we mentioned before, is often used in a way that's not really substantially to be distinguished from the use of the simple future. In fact, I was just looking at the text recently of a 4th century grammarian who doesn't even list the future perfect as one of the tenses of Latin. He just skips over it entirely. And I'm not certain, but I think the reason is because he just lumps it in together conceptually with the simple future, because the Romans sometimes used these in a way that made it hard to draw a bright line between them. In any case, that's what we're looking at here. When literally you will have lifted up the Son of Man, and this is one of course, Jesus's messianic titles that appears frequently in this gospel. Let's pause, by the way, before we move on from exalto. It's ex alto. Alto coming from the adjective altus, high or lofty. Sometimes confusingly also deep, that is in the other direction, a great extent of space. But usually high or lofty. So ex alto means to make something lofty, often confused in its English derivative exalts with a similar sounding word, exults, in English with a U. Okay, this is not the same thing. Exults in English comes from exulto in Latin, which, like ex alto, is a first conjugation verb. But we won't go too much into that. Just be aware that there's two different words there that you might confuse based on certain sloppy usage in English. In any case, then you will know or recognize, and notice this key thematic vowel cluing us into the future here. You will know that, here we get this key phrase in the gospel, I am. Remember, this is a reference to Exodus 3:14, to God the Father's name for himself. This is an implicit claim to deity, which has a predictably infuriating impact on Jesus' skeptical audience. In any case, we've seen that a number of times before. You will recognize that I am, and furthermore, you'll recognize that, so we got to kind of repeat this quia in our mind, I do nothing a me ipso. And that prepositional phrase is pretty easy. Of my own accord, probably we would say naturally in English. I don't do anything, but rather, just as the Father has taught me, just as, this is our key word here, these things, that is the same things that he has taught me over here, these are the same things over here that I speak, that I say.